Hey YouTube, this is the Art of Prepping. I've been observing something on various YouTube channels. These YouTube channels are fairly large, very well known. I'm not going to name them because I have more respect than concern at this point. But I've just been noticing that sometimes they'll refer to some of the gear that they're trying to promote because they do get a profit on the end. You know, they get like a kickback, if you will, from Amazon or from whatever company that's selling it, and that they go through their portal, you know, the link that they provide, they get a whatever percent as a commission. And that's all cool and everything. You know, just like I think it's cool if you make content and you do things to expand the minds of others, and even if it's just entertaining, then, you know, having advertisements or ads on your channel, even though it pays very little. It's like about 1 penny for every, this is the going rate right now, about 1 penny for every 10 ads. So if you think that people are making buku money off of their channel, unless they have a very, very high traffic volume, they're not doing so well. And but anyways, going back to this, it's just, there's a handful of YouTubers that make statements that aren't really true. And it's somewhat relative to sometimes what they're selling or not. Sometimes they're not selling anything. They're just misspeaking. But these individuals, I think that most of them mean well and they have the good intentions, but they'll kind of say things like, this item is useful for any survival situation. And it's almost like it imparts, like, oh, if you have this, regardless of what's going on with you, you're not going to have the same problems, and it'll probably solve the problem, or at least it'll be able to work with anything that goes on. And I'm here to tell you that, just taking tools, for example, there's a reason why they make a toolbox, because there's a lot of different types of tools. And for me to sit here and say, this particular multi-tool is the tool of all tools, and you don't need a toolbox, or you don't need any other tools, or different kind of multi-tools to fit your needs that might be custom to your needs, is totally baloney. So you know what your needs are. You know what kind of tools you need. So you need to find those tools and get those tools and have them at the ready. And so instead of trying to rely on a YouTuber that does like a tool review and saying, no, you don't need anything else but this one survival tool, and it's useful for it'll be able to satisfy any survival situation, or at the minimum, it's useful in any survival situation. That may not be true. And so, you know, maybe for the vast majority, it would give the person a level of redundancy, or maybe it would solve their needs. But for a lot of people, other people, I've noticed there's a lot of things that people push that don't meet my needs at all if I was to use that in my system. So be wary and be, you know, obviously open-minded, but, you know, be a little critical in the thinking process to make sure you're not just, especially if you're a new prepper. I get a lot of new subscribers every day, and I want to thank you. The channel is doing really good, but it's just a matter that a lot of these new, you know, subscribers are very new to prepping. And I get a lot of those emails that, hey, you know, well, how do I start? And, you know, and I have those videos. If you want to actually do a search for them, you'll find it. But I'm just here to say that there's not a one size fits all survival tool, or there's not a one thing does everything kind of tool out there. Just like there's not one survival food that you could eat for a year long or 2 years in a row and not get palate fatigue or not be nutritionally deficient. You have to eat a variety of food. That's how we're designed and built. And so, you know, we have to be mindful that we don't want to oversimplify things. We want to reduce it and we want to make it manageable, the realities of prepping, but we don't want to oversimplify things to the point that it actually hurts us. Just like you can be a minimalist in your backpacking, and when you transfer over to making your bug out bag, for example, a 72-hour pack, for example, it doesn't mean that you can't use some of that knowledge that you have when you go ultralight backpacking. But it does have a problem though when you try to integrate a system that is so ill-equipped to meet your needs just because you're trying to shave weight off your pack, instead of actually looking at the focus of how are you going to actually satisfy all your needs as a priority, instead of just making it a light pack. Now, being a lightweight pack and easy to carry is a priority. I'm not knocking that. But my example is simply, you have to be mindful of the purpose of what you're doing. And instead of having or adopting a philosophy that is based off of inherent errors because the philosophy isn't actually designed or formulated to solve the particular issue at hand, or for our situation, the needs of our person to survive a certain period of time. And so we just have to be mindful of the bigger picture, of not to oversimplify things to our detriment. And that's what happens a lot of times when you get all these new pieces of gear that haven't even been tested really in the real world. Flashlights, backpacks, clothing, you name it, it's out there. And they sell it. They put it out and sell it as, okay, this solves all your needs. And you really don't need to look anywhere else. Every situation is going to be satisfied with this. And it's just not true. It doesn't take a lot of critical thinking to think of that tool being used maybe in the Arctic versus the desert versus a swampy area. I mean, you can just do that in your mind, and you can see that the item probably would fail. And if not, you could see at least the inherent limitations of why you'd probably want redundancies or other variations. Let's say for fire, I mean, so what if they've built a lighter that is just built like a tank? It can make 2,000 fires at a minimum. It's completely submergible and it relights instantly. Let's say that there is a lighter out there that does that, and like maybe 50 other things it can do. Just an amazing lighter that's never been, designed before. Would you honestly, on a brand new item that hasn't even really had the test of time, and just for the sole reason of it being one item, would you put all your faith and all of your fire needs, all that critical element of making fire, especially in an emergency, if you got frostbitten or maybe you fell in a lake and you need a fire like right now, no playing around, would you stake your life on that lighter? And a lot of people would say, I don't care how good the lighter is. I don't care if all the tests ever performed shows that it never failed. I would at least want one or two redundant elements to make that fire. And that's where we get back into prepping, is having a tiered system of preparation. And so don't get caught up in all the newfangled stuff. And in fact, a lot of things have already been designed and created that are more than adequate. Now you may say, well, there's always improvements and refinements, and that's true. And I'm all totally on board. Various tools, hand tools, saws, cutting tools, and other different types of tools are constantly getting better with better steel, better designs. And I will never argue that maybe getting one of those, as long as it's built well and it meets your needs, it couldn't be part of your system. But what I am saying, that things that have already been designed that are pretty much optimum already, it's kind of hard to improve upon optimum, and don't get me wrong, most things have not been pushed to its limits. I mean, there's probably still new ways to make fire in the future that we haven't thought of yet. Just like there's probably new types of clothing that will be coming out in the future that may make a lot of our base layer clothing or polyester clothing or various other wicking clothing obsolete. Maybe it's just a super unbelievable type of nanotechnology that we've never really developed yet. Just like with, personal protection. Maybe there comes a new type of a tool that was never conceived of that can make someone just stop in their tracks or help you hunt. I don't know. I can't predict the future per se, but we can say that there will be new and bigger advancements in the future, because there always is. And I think the lighting industry, especially, let's just take one company, for example, Olight, for example, among many other great light companies, is just always full of innovation. And they're constantly coming out with bigger and better bolder lights, brighter lights, not so much even bigger. Actually, they're smaller. I should say that. They're actually smaller lights, but brighter, longer runtime, better LED technology, better battery technology. And this seems like it never ends, and it may never end. At some point, though, it may get to the point, in fact, that the LED itself is going to be obsolete and something else will change over. Just like the LED basically replaced traditional incandescent bulbs, and I think was it halogen bulbs and the CFLs, what they call that? The ones that were the gas tube ones. Those types of all those predecessors had come about before LED really got hot and got out there. And now we don't think of anything but LED. And it's like, how did we ever survive without LED? And the question is not how do we survive? It's how did we make do with what we have? Well, I guess we're making do with LED lights, just like we made do with incandescent bulbs. We only know what we know, so we just use what we have. And that's what we can say that, for the most part, though, believe it or not, if you're pretty much into prepping and have at least some type of expansive knowledge base to pull from, you pretty much know the answer to most things in terms of what you need to satisfy each category of your need. And if you know that there's different levels of quality, you know that there's some tarps that are going to weigh several pounds. And then there's also some lighter tarps, in particular in some very high-end nylon type tarps that will weigh only a few ounces. Now, it depends on if you want to spend the money on the higher end one, or do you want to just drop down $10 at Walmart and get you just a real basic tarp. They both do the trick and they both do the job, but you have a lot more weight on one and a lot more bulk on one than the other. And so in this modern day, we already have systems that, survival packs can be literally ultra light by true definition, like 20 pounds or less. And it could be outfitted with enough capabilities to easily sustain you for a period of time that's desirable. But that doesn't mean that people actually take advantage of it because of cost, mainly that. And the cost is really the main factor for a lot of things, in fact, in life. Or it could be just because you don't have the knowledge that exists. I have noticed that sometimes people are just not aware that something's there. And so when you see something that's very commercialized, that you're blown away, but you didn't even really know what else was even available, and you just buy into the hype, and then what happens in the hindsight after you get used to this new thing and you find out that it's just okay, it's not as great as they said, that some of the previous options that were available just at a higher quality level that you just didn't know about actually are still better than the newer things. And that's what I kind of find out too. It's not always true, but it's typically is more true than not. Now flashlights are always getting better and better, so that might be one of the exceptions. But in clothing technology and some backpacks, I will have to say over time they keep on getting better for the most part. But there are some things, just like bladed tools, even though bushcraft knives and hand saws, they do get better every year to some degree. But it's such a niche market; it doesn't grow as fast as other types of categories of prepping. And so just be careful not to be jumping into things because they're fads. And, just like with water technology or filtering technology, the technology that it's already out right now is enough and good enough for well over 99% of the people out there. I mean, it's decent. It really is. They're compact, lightweight, and fairly affordable. And for the most part, especially, if you look hard enough, you'll find things that really will last you many, many, many gallons of filtration. I mean, thousands, if not even more than that. And so we got to be mindful of how much of this stuff do we really need? Do we need how many different kinds of redundancies? And how much are we going to put our hard-earned money into what that category is asking us to acquire? I mean, yes, we need to have all this done because when we need it, we need it. But I wouldn't go crazy gun-ho, for example, with flashlights. if you want a searchlight and you want, a really high quality, for example, like an O light, that may cost, $200 to $250 range or whatever for the newest ones, I will have to say it's not the worst investment. But just know that next month they could come out with something that is even brighter and smaller and maybe even has better battery technology, or maybe a better charging system, or a new battery, system. I don't know. I just can tell you, though, that things will always change. So at some point you do have to pull the trigger and say, okay, I'm going to purchase. I just, at some point you just need the product, and that's always going to get better or change. And if you can say, okay, this type of light it meets my needs, and even if it got better, I wouldn't need that because it would be excessive. And if it's excessive, then by no means, would you need to get that. So sometimes it's totally cool to pull the trigger and say, I'm just going to go ahead and make this purchase because it doesn't need to get any better. And that's kind of where I'm at, that especially like on headlamps. Even though I got some bright ones, and I'm not saying that my Fox LA MX 10 is like the brightest thing in the world, but it's great. It's brighter than the average headlamp needs to be to do the average camp task, or even survival task for that matter. So it exceeds really what you need, but relatively speaking, out on the market today, there's stuff that can just completely blow it out of the water. No doubt about it. But you also have much, much higher cost, more exotic battery technology. It requires a lot more finagling and a lot more basically just familiarizing yourself with the light for the most part. And believe it or not, I get more turned on going to like an Academy Sports or a Walmart whenever I do get out that way and I find one. Looking at, some of their value lights that are water resistant. I need to have some type of drop protection, some kind of shock resistance and water protection. But the newer LED headlamps that are these, store brand, they're actually freaking great. I think it's a Magellan brand with Academy Sports, and I kind of kicked myself for not getting one. It wasn't on sale last time I went. So maybe next time I go, maybe they'll be on sale, but they weren't that much. I think maybe like $7.99 or maybe a little bit less. But it was a really decent, shocking water-resistant light headlamp. It didn't have like this unbelievable output, but it was really, really decent. It had a long run time. Those to me, are more attractive than some kind of the newest, brightest 1,000 lumen 2-mile throw with these beacon modes and all these things that most likely I would never use. Now the beacon mode actually is pretty cool, but the SOS and all this most likely would probably never be used. Maybe even the strobe, unless you'd use it for bike riding. I don't know. A lot of this is just excessive. And so for me, I kind of just find it more fun to buy things that are relatively affordable, still very usable, and that could last many, many years in particular. But instead of getting that one super high-end, brand new, just hit the market headlamp that once again is just like, can be seen from the moon, and it's just off the planet awesome, everybody has to have one, but it's like $200. I would rather get myself a $7.99 Magellan, I believe that's what the name brand was, at Academy Sports, and get me maybe like, 5 or 6 or even 10 of those, and have one for every pack, and have one in the car, one in the shed, one in the barn, maybe one in the house, or, maybe even have a couple in a stash, around someone else's home or in a cache system. Maybe it's buried. Maybe it's in someone's garage. Maybe it's someone's attic. I don't know, wherever you put stuff. That would be a better use of the money, most likely, in realistic terms, than just having one light that you're afraid to even use it because it's so expensive you only want to use it in certain applications, anytime you spend like $200 or $300 on anything, you kind of baby it a little bit more, especially if it's a flashlight or a knife. You just don't really want to really get on it. But if you only have like $7 or $8 invested in the light, you're more like, hey, I'm just going to use it until it breaks. And if it gets 2 or 3, 10 years even, you'd be like, cool, that was a good use of my money. Versus the light that you don't really hardly want to use that much because you don't want to hurt it. And while you're not using it, the technology increases over time to the point that light is completely obsolete, at least, in modern terms. even though it works just fine. There's a point though that I bought things myself that were very high end in the past, find myself never using it. And so I would rather have usable items and more of those than just maybe one. And so just remember to think about that too when you're getting prepped. So that not only does not one thing can solve all problems, you don't sometimes just want one thing. You want to have maybe several things, redundancy, even if it's the same item. But most likely, though, if you can, maybe have different types of redundancy. Just like you wouldn't want to have 3 of the same headlamps, because maybe there's an inherent flaw in that headlamp that in the situation that you're in, it exploits that flaw and it makes it useless, whatever that flaw could be. I'm just talking generically. And so instead of having just that same brand, and I'm not sure why you would need 3 headlamps in a backpack, for example, but let's just say this is what you want. I would go with 3 different brands and make sure that they all use the same battery. So, that's just one way I would go about it. Now you may say, well, I want to streamline and I'd rather have all the same brand of the same headlamp and have all the same 3 headlamps of the same brand. Well, that's cool. But once again, if you have a problem, then all of the headlamps may have the same problem. So just be mindful of this. Now, some people say, well, you shouldn't even go with, all your lights using the same battery. And I kind of think it's just a lot more easier to maintain and to keep up with keeping your batteries fresh. I like the idea, but there's another camp of people too that say, but if you're in a real scavenging, survival, long-term disaster thing, this is of course if you only have one type of battery that is used in your flashlight, instead of having maybe like 3 different type of battery systems, because you have like 3 different types of lights using totally different battery systems, that if you come across some batteries, but it's not the kind you need, then you're totally out of luck. Versus if you had a AAA headlamp, a AA headlamp, and maybe a one with a CR123s, that if you come across any one of those 3, you have at least a source for your lights, at least one of your lights. And so there's different ways to look at all this. It depends on your system, how you want it. I tend to be a little more simple on that stuff. I'd rather have 3 headlamps with the same battery so that I can interchange them instead in case one of them breaks for whatever reason. I think that to me makes a little bit more practical sense. But of course, you have a lot of different viewpoints. And some of them are not so much like wrong or anything. It's just depends on how you want to frame your reality. And but just don't make your reality so unrealistic that you actually put yourself in harm once again. As always, you guys take care, and I'll catch you soon.